We do want to get going and get ready for the next session. We've got Jeremiah Dewey from Rapid7 that is going to be talking about getting more from your MSSP. So with that, let's bring in Jeremiah.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Hey, Jeremiah. Nice. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you good. Yeah. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for having me. Trey, in all honesty, I'm going to be very high level on hand wavy compared to the detail that you went into there. But I know there will be subsequent sessions that we'll dig into more detail from me. But I'm here to talk with you guys about getting more from your MSSP. What we're going to do is talk about really the process all the way from when to engage with an MSSP, kind of the decision process in doing that, and then going into some moves to ensure success, all the way from getting started and kicking off the relationship into once it's kicked off and it's underway, making it work. And then, it's inevitable in some cases there is a breakup. How do you go through that, and what are some of the factors for it? So with that said, I think we'll go ahead and dive in on this, on when to engage. You'll see that I've peppered various UniCon graphics in here from what I could grab from SCYTHE, and maybe a couple others that AI generated for me. I even have one in here that I think was a bearded unicorn. Thanks, Bryson, for creating that. But some various graphics that I've tossed in. But this one in particular, I think, is an interesting one on kind of the decision process for when is it the right time to make a move with engaging with a partner. And the way to look at this is it's very similar to kind of the Eisenhower matrix on making decisions based on urgency and importance. And the way to look at this is the things that you need to accomplish, or the areas of your security program, whether they're in strategic importance, which is, okay, how vital is this function to our company, if you're a company, or if you're a nonprofit, if you're in the government, to our organization or our agency. Does it own a critical component of risk to the organization? Is it a key part of what makes us unique? And then you look on the other axis here of the operational performance and the day-to-day, how important is it? I'm not saying that this is, your decision to engage with an MSSP, depending on what function you choose to move to them. It can be different for every organization based upon where security is for you. But in examining that, and in a majority of cases that I've found so far, that area to move to an MSSP is where it is of some strategic importance, but it's not like a defining character of your company. Yet in the day-to-day, it's very, very important. And that's where we found a lot of organizations have successfully chosen to move to an MSSP. And there are a number of benefits to it. Obviously, there are some potential drawbacks as well, but many of those benefits are where you've got the force multiplier effect. You've got the organization who, as opposed to, say, an internal security team, they've got the view of thousands of customers throughout the world, and the true kind of threat environment, if you will, and can make moves faster and see things perhaps a little faster where they are. But once you've made that determination of making the move to engage with an MSSP, you've got some key moves for success here. And these are just summarized. I'll go into each one in detail in subsequent slides. But the four on the left are focused on that kickoff, articulating your needs in the whole process of finding the right partner for you. And then on the right, you've got the steps that are mostly involved with ensuring success of that partnership. And as I mentioned at the end, we'll talk about, when it comes to an end, whether it's maybe for negative reasons, maybe they're not performing, or it could be for positive reasons too. Maybe you've chosen to insource over time, and your program has grown to the point where maybe you don't need some of those external partners. But with that said, we'll dig in. Let's talk about getting started, kicking off the relationship with your MSSP. And that starts with really identifying and articulating what it is you need. What are you looking for out of a partner? You really have a true grasp of that? A lot of people will say that they do. I think this falls in line with if you ask 100 managers, are you a micromanager? 100 of them will tell you they're not. 99% of them probably are. And in this case, I think a lot of organizations will tell you they know exactly what they want. But when you start to dig in and ask some questions, there are still some nebulous areas there. Uh, what typically works for companies when they're kind of wading into these waters is engaging with a trusted source. I put Gartner here as an example, but there are plenty others that you can engage with. And the reason why I put Gartner here is they are helpful to companies when they're trying to put together RFPs. And one word of caution there, though, is don't just blindly use a generic RFP template that you get. Many times we've seen this. We've gotten RFPs in my organization from companies that need a partner, and they just took the generic template, or they took one from another engagement, and another company's name is actually in that template. This happens more often than you think it would. So really review the templates you get. If you're using an example RFP from someone else, make sure you go through it and ensure your name's in it. Make sure your requirements are listed in there. And it's one of the reasons for that is there are many types of MSSPs out there. Do you need the traditional MDR, which in many cases is tied to an EDR? Now there are more cloud sources going into it. Are you looking for a managed SOC, someone who's more along the lines of, say, a traditional MSSP that's going to answer every blinky light, that's going to manage and turn the wrench on the tech that's there? Maybe a managed SIM. Maybe they're just managing that product itself. Believe it or not, those three are actually different services. And if you're not really specific on what you need out of the service, you may end up with a generic template for a standard MSSP that does everything when you only need maybe a specific MDR portion of it. So ensure you've truly articulated what you need out of your provider. And then when you get the answers from them and they're providing their proposals to you, they're coming back with questions. That's an opportunity to pepper them with questions too. It doesn't mean you pull them into a room and you waterboard them per se. Nobody enjoys that game of stump the chump. The whole idea is not to prove that you're the smartest person in the room. The idea is really kind of poking holes in the arguments that they've provided you to ensure that this is going to be a successful partnership, that they'll do what they've said, and that the things that they've said they'll do are actually realistic. And some of the questions to ask, like, hey, where's your team located? Are they remote? Are they in the office? Are they U.S. only? Do you have requirements for U.S. only? Are they in Four Eyes nations? Can they be anywhere? This is going to be based on your requirements as well. How resilient is that team? What's their turnover been? How resilient is their company? If they're a startup, if they're on, their A round, okay, how are the financials there? How strong are they looking? If they've been acquired before, who's acquired them? One interesting question to ask is, we've all been through this. The pandemic happened. What did they do at the beginning when everyone went remote? How did they handle that? Again, this gets back to resilience. Talk about the efficacy of their detections, false positives, false negatives. What are the rates there? Have they missed pen tests? Kind of a news flash. People do miss pen tests. We have a great pen test team here at Rapid7, and I will tell you, more often than not, in a vast majority of cases, they get in. It's their job. But how do these service providers handle those cases? How do they partner with their customers to find out what happened, where they can beef up their detections? Have they missed real world incidents? What do they do in those cases? What are the SLAs they provide? Are they using AI, and how? Is it just a buzzword that they're putting in front of you? Or are they actually using automation for, say, alert handling, some disposition? Some of these questions you ask and some of their answers may require going under NDA. So just, be prepared to sign one if you're going to really dig in with some questions that may have sensitive answers. And believe it or not, this is the thing too. If you sign an NDA, does your legal team demand that it's on your paper? Does the provider demand it's on theirs? These little nuances could potentially pose some delay in your process of finding the right partner. Ask them for references. We've seen this happen in many cases. People will ask for 3 references. As a matter of fact, they'll demand references. And I think it's good. One thing to keep in mind, though, if you're using an MSSP in terms of MDR, anything detection and response, people don't readily sign up to be references for it, especially, say, in the world of IR. Signing up as a reference customer means that you're essentially indicating that you've been the victim of an attack before. So it's hard to find a ready list that consists of many potential references. So please keep this in mind. I'm not saying don't ask for them, but what I am saying is if you're going to demand references, keep in mind that you probably should sign up to be one yourself. It's not very fair to demand 5 reference calls and tell them, hey, you know what? No, I'm not going to be a reference for you. One thing you also need to understand, though, is that these references are going to be cherry picked. If the provider is going to give you names of customers, obviously they're going to index on the happy ones. So, don't be afraid to ask tough questions of these references, but knowing that they're likely to be a little cherry picked, go find some other sources too. Gartner has peer insights. There are some other sources online. I mean, even Glassdoor, if you want to check. Know that sometimes those are a little skewed as well. But as I mentioned, please please sign up to be a reference if you're going to demand it. Testimonials are helpful as well. This obviously assumes that your experience will be well. I don't think any providers paste bad testimonials on their website, but just know what you're getting into when you request these things. And obviously check the paper. I mean, know exactly what you signed up for. Who are you going to call if there's an issue with your service? If there's an incident that pops off, who do you call? Is it their SOC? Do they have a representative who you'll talk with? And the same thing, if there's a problem and they need to reach out to someone, is your call tree up to date? Are there SLOs, SLAs, SLIs? I can't think of another vowel to put after SL on that, but the things to ensure that you check on for the contract. If you're under strict SLAs to report things somewhere, but yet your service provider is on an SLA that's a much longer time frame, that's an issue. So you want to check on those and ensure you know what you're signing up for. And finally, is there an auto renew on the contract? This is something that comes up. We'll talk about this when we get to the breakup part of this, but knowing when you go in that at the 9-month mark, this thing auto renews, you don't want to find out at month 10 that you're not happy, right? So you may want to go ahead and make them aware beforehand, either that you're not going to renew or just ensure that you review the service before that auto renewal kicks in. The worst time to find out you've got deficiencies of the contract is when you're in the midst of an incident. Those of you who made the move to Office 365 a few years ago, many people found this out the hard way, that logging wasn't very robust at the time unless you paid for additional logging. So again, make sure you know what you're signing up for. What's the worst case scenario, and prepare for that. Now that you've selected your provider, you're ready to go, you've got everything in place. All right, let's see how we make this thing work. Yeah, this is going past the kickoff. One of the things you'll need to do is hold consistent standards. And one of the reasons for this is, you've gone through this process at the beginning to set up, okay, here's what success looks like for us, provider. Here's what success looks like for you. Talk about that early, come to agreement on what each party believes it looks like, and no surprises. We can't guarantee a lack of surprises, but we can certainly strive for it. And changes happen on both sides. They happen on the side of the provider. Obviously, MSSPs strive to not introduce a lot of change to their customers, right? So if they've got a representative that they've assigned to you, in a vast majority of cases, they're not going to want to change that person. But people leave. People go on vacation. Unfortunately, sometimes people fall into ill health, and there may need to be some changes in personnel, but hopefully that doesn't mean there's a change in the level of service. And it's the same thing with customers. From a recent study that was done by ION Security and Artico Search, and they do this every year. They produce some very good content in this area. 75% of CISOs were considering a job change. And in many cases for your MSSP, the CISO, or at least the security operations lead, is the customer. And if that person's changing within your organization, if you're coming in new, or if you're the person who's got it and you're leaving, there's still, your provider's under a contractual obligation. You've signed that contract as well. If a new person comes in and wants to change those expectations, that's a whole process that has to kick off. And so ensure when those changes happen on your side as a customer, and any MSSPs who are on here as well, ensure this happens on your side as well. You've got to communicate early, and you have to communicate often. Many times your providers have to really kind of go and resell themselves to the new security leader who's arrived to ensure that they can show, hey, there's value in this partnership and we want it to continue. Now, with any relationship, you're going to have your ups and downs. The MSSP has its own ups and downs. They'll have the ups and downs in the relationship. You'll have them as your own organization, your company. the ultimate success of that relationship, it depends less on how much you love the ups. They're always going to be ups, right? But how do you both recover from the downs? That's the true kind of sign of resilience and the lasting relationship. Do they reach out to you proactively when they made a mistake? We all make mistakes. Do they just try to sweep it under the rug and hope you never notice? Or do they reach out and say, hey, we messed up. Here's where we messed up. Here's what we're doing to make it better. And in the cases where maybe they haven't found that mistake, but you bring it to their attention, do they own it? When they own that mistake, what do they do to go back and make it right? Now, this can mean different things to different organizations in terms of making it right. And you have to determine for yourself, what does that mean to you? Does that mean they provide some service credits for time? Does it mean that they produce an after action report, that they change some of their processes and procedures? I would be wary of the cases in which there's a true degradation of service, or they just haven't fulfilled their obligations and they turn around and say, hey, I'll make it up to you. We'll give you a discount. I think and Bryson has heard me say this before, there are different ways of saying it. And I'll paraphrase in this case, it's really hard to hold the moral high ground when you attach a dollar amount to it. So if they've done something that in your eyes is a down, so to speak, in the relationship, yes, it's always good to get a little bit of a break on what you're paying. But if that's the only thing they're doing in response to it, I wouldn't say they've really addressed it. So it's something to keep in mind as you ride the ups and downs of the relationship roller coaster with your MSSP. And finally, as you're going through this, you're going to have to assess progress. I mean, where we were as a field in security when I first got into it a long time ago, and where we are now, I mean, I would say it's a vastly different world. And in each of your contract years with your MSSP, you and they are going to be making progress in your programs and how they deliver service and how you receive the service, how you work with each other. The thing is, you want to make sure, are they improving? What are the measures of progress? How are the expectations changing over time? And, really the whole point of engaging with the partners, are you improving as a program? Hold each other accountable. Is your program growing in its capabilities because of the partnership? Are you growing outside that partnership? This should be a journey that you take together, not just sign the agreement, kick the can down the road for another year. If you are engaged with an MSSP and you look back 3 years from when you started and you really haven't progressed, I wouldn't call that a successful relationship. Now, when we say progress, there are different definitions of that, and that's something you've got to work out with the MSSP. And I would say they need to be a willing participant in helping to identify that as well. And finally, how are you doing? It's okay to ask them. I mean, they are a partner here, not simply kind of, a faceless vendor. This is a partnership, and you need feedback on how you're stacking up against others in your industry. Say you've had 8 incidents throughout the year. What about those incidents can tell you something about your cohort of companies or organizations in your industry? What about their customer base as a whole? You're responding to the incidents they report to you in a particular amount of time. Is that fast? Is that slow? Maybe you have a general MSSP that works with a more specialized MSSP. How are they doing together? And in general, just how is your team to work with? Some people, believe it or not, in the field of security, some people are very difficult in this field. So how is your team easy to work with? Are they difficult to work with? Do they have relationships internally within your organization that force them to have to be difficult for the provider to get them the things that they need? I think service providers sometimes forget that, and it's helpful. I've been on both sides of this as a customer and as a provider. And when I'm a customer, and when I was in security, I had people, whether it was my boss, whether it's the board or it's another organization that are on me for updates that need details. In return, I have to go to service providers, to partners, get updates from them. Depending on the heat that's on me, just as much heat or even more, I have to put on others who will provide me those answers. And service providers need to be aware of that. But I think as customers, it's good to let them know the dynamics you're dealing with as well. I think really at the end of each contract year, it's good to step back and ask yourself, and really ask the provider as well, was this really a partnership? Did we partner in this, or is this strictly a relationship in which I'm the one making the demands, they're the vendor, they do what I tell them, and that's it? I think it's important to know, again, getting back to that decision matrix, why did you engage with a service provider? What do you need out of them? What are the details there? And how do you work towards success together? And finally, we alluded to this at the beginning. There sometimes there is a breakup with your service provider. Maybe in the unfortunate circumstance, it didn't go the way you had hoped. What we hope for is that it actually did go that way, but you have other, maybe more positive reasons for a breakup. The reason why I say this is, our particular service provider, we do this at Rapid7, and there are other service providers as well who are tied to the technology that they sell, that they provide. I would say in a perfect scenario, we have customers who sign up for our managed service because they need a partner, or maybe they haven't hired a team to do it yet. Maybe they don't have 24/7 and they need a partner to really kind of help them get off the ground and get going. Over the years, they build that capability in-house, and they're ready to, quote unquote, graduate from having the service provider do it to them kind of taking the keys, hopping behind the wheel, and driving it themselves. Sure, in terms of revenue, companies are going to look at that as, say, a degradation. The way I look at it in terms of a partnership, it's a success. We got our customers to that point. We got there together. And so there would be a breakup in the service at that time. But both parties involved in this really need to make sure they're ready for it. And the things that you need to keep in mind when a breakup comes is okay, they have your data. In many cases, a customer's data is going through our technology. It's processed, it's stored. So when a customer leaves, it's incumbent upon us as a provider to delete that data. And customers are well within their rights to ask for proof of that deletion to ensure that it happens, especially those who are multinational and dealing with some of the regulations that are in Europe and in many places throughout the world that are building more regulations along those lines. Is the data deleted? Is it gone when the relationship ends? Removal of access. If they're keeping the technology, but they're taking the keys, are the provider's personnel out? Has that access been removed? Is there a plan for a cutover? If it's a true rip and replace of technology, is there a time of overlap? Are they ready for it? It sounds strange, but I guarantee you this happens more often than you believe it does. We've had customers who say, okay, we're going to make the change. We're moving to a new technology. And they come back going, hey, look, actually, can you stick around for 3 months, 4 months, maybe even 6 months? This was a lot harder than we thought it would be, and we need more time to make the migration. These are things to think about well in advance of terminating a contract. The question comes up, which we mentioned in a previous slide, was there an auto renewal on this? If there was, again, this is something to know early on with the contract. That way you can either submit a letter at the beginning to say, I don't intend to renew, even though you may. That may be able to kind of cut off the clause. This is something you would need to work with your legal team and with the provider's legal team on. If there's an auto renew at a particular time, say it's after 9 months, I think that's kind of standard. If it's after 6, I would have a hard conversation with the vendor about why they put it there, or if it's after month 10 or month 11, ensure that you do a thorough service review before then to see, is this a relationship we want to continue? Are we going to go our separate ways? Do I need to provide my notice for it? If you're past the auto renew point, but things have just really gone south, your best bet in this case is definitely engaging with your legal team. They can engage with the provider's legal team and they can work it out. It's always advisable to do that in an amicable way. If it devolves to, I'll have my lawyer call your lawyer, then don't be surprised if both sides kind of clam up and don't, and are not rather outright in talking with each other. So ensure that it's amicable when you do it. And finally, the key thing in this, you went into it with success in mind. The provider went into it with success in mind. You don't want to make this a regrettable experience. No regrets for either party in this relationship and where you're going. I've found over the years, I've worked at organizations where we did it all in-house. I've worked in some where we've outsourced in particular areas where we thought strategically it made sense. And I've provided service to organizations that essentially outsourced everything. I've seen it successful in every one of those scenarios, and I've seen pitfalls in each of those. I think it really comes down to expectations, knowing when you don't have all the answers, and partnering, and always assuming the best of intent. Those who are providing these services, much like myself, we've been in security for a long time. A lot of us have been practitioners. We've been on the customer side before, and the intent is to partner. And trust me, the people working in these services, when you as a company go through an incident, if an attacker makes it through, they take it personally, and they are going to jump in and roll up their sleeves and do everything within their power, and sometimes outside their power, to help and to get you through it. And if they don't, again, this is when you really see their true colors and where they shine and where they don't. That's when I would seriously start taking a look. Who are the other partners out there who can fulfill your needs, assuming that you've articulated those needs in the right way. So going through all that, I wanted to leave a little time. If there were questions at the end, you're no longer subject to my terrible memes, but I will subject you to a couple bearded unicorns. Again, thank you, Bryson, for those graphics, but would be happy to take questions if there are some. And, in the spirit of kind of what I just mentioned, I may not have the answers to those questions. I may not have all the answers, but I'll guarantee you honesty in what I say.
Awesome. So
go ahead, Trey.
I appreciate the presentation, good sir, and I am loving the use of memeage inside your slides. It was just the right amount.
Perfect. Well, that's good.
We had a few questions for you. We had talked about expectations for the MSSP, things you would expect to hear from them, things you should ask for. Yeah. But I wanted to touch on what are some of those big expectations you would expect as the customer to be held to? What are the things that you would typically want your customer to say, do, all of that above?
Sure. Well, I think for a lot of your service providers, especially your MDRs or anything that's tied to a technology, the first thing that you're going to expect out of the customer is for them to deploy the technology. I can't tell you how many times we've had customers call, like, I've got an incident. Okay, cool. We're going to get into the agent. We're going to grab some evidence. Agent, what are you talking about? I haven't deployed.
What agent?
Yeah, and that creates an issue. I think, deploying the tech, partnering with the service provider to make sure that the tech works, and ensuring the contacts are correct on their side. We have had a few instances happen, in which we'll call, oh my gosh, something bad's popping off. Quick, call the customer. And that person no longer there, or the number doesn't work. So I think deploying, getting the tech in place, getting the provider the access that they need, because sometimes, especially if it's your standard MSSP that needs to log into other tech, do they have those logins? And then ensuring the contacts are correct on their side. I think those are the keys to really kind of getting on track and fulfilling the expectations of the provider.
You're muted, Trey.
That's a great question, Trey.
Of course.
I was trying to read your lips.
Yeah, exactly.
I was saying. Sorry, no, I hate that mute button. So last question I've got for you, good sir. Along the whole vein of trust but verify, you were talking about specific things that you would expect an MSSP to do, say like housing your data in a specific region, or having teams that are only working in certain regions and making sure that your data, your information, or what's going on with those incidents isn't being triaged in another geographical area. Is there some kind of mechanism or something that people should be aware of that allows them to do that trust but verify piece? Because I would expect you, if you're telling me your guys work in USA only, that they're here in this region. But we've seen from other breaches and from reports and the way things go, that's not always the case. Yeah. So what would you recommend that people do to kind of go about that whole process? Yeah.
One of the things that I would recommend is that they ask for the certifications from the provider. Have they gotten, I forget all the alphabet soup that ties to that, whether it's CMMC, SOC 2 and things like that may not necessarily tell the specifics of where people are located, but it tells you that they've really kind of gone in for validation of their controls and what are there. The technical validation to say, hey, I'm seeing that I'm in US East, but wait a minute, there's something in Europe. I'm not sure on that. Again, I'm the hand wavy business guy, but I think those things definitely should be there from the provider. But one thing that customers sometimes forget to ask, it's more than just the analysts who are logging in to do the details and the forensics and the investigation. If you're going with an MSSP that's tied to technology, where's the support team coming in from? If they have a US only SOC, that's great. But are there support techs coming in from overseas? If they are, they're still accessing your technology and your data, and that could be a thing. So in the Trust but Verify, I would definitely ask for the certifications that exist from regulatory bodies, any of their audit reports that they're able to give, again, probably under NDA. And then on the more technical, like, hey, can you provide a report of where that sits, say within AWS or Azure? I would have to unfortunately call this one where I don't know the specific answer, but would defer to those who have longer neckbeards than I do.
No, that's an awesome answer, and that's where I was hoping you would hit on it. I know that's a big issue for a lot of people in certain realms, so I feel like it needed to be said.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that is all we have for you for questions, good sir. I appreciate your time.
Great.
Thank you very much, Jeremiah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.